Welcome back to Sleepy Saga Histories, where quiet stories from long ago are told by firelight to help you drift away. Tonight, you'll journey through a forgotten moment in time, a soft thread in the fabric of ancient life, slow and unhurried. Let the day fall away, your breath slow, and if this story keeps you company, you're always welcome back to the fire. The fire is low tonight, and the world outside sleeps beneath a blanket of stars. The soft hiss of logs settles into a rhythm, and the faint crackle of flame echoes the warmth of a Roman kitchen long ago. Imagine, if you will, a quiet morning in ancient Rome, not in the marble forums or the colonnaded temples, but in the kitchens behind tall walls, kitchens where the scent of smoke and oil mingles with honey, garlic and salted fish. It is still early. The streets beyond are just beginning to stir, the sounds of hooves on stone faintly audible in the distance. But in here, among jars and clay pots, something peculiar simmers. A cook wearing a simple tunic stained by years of toil moves with the same care one might expect from a priest preparing sacred rites. He stands before a brazier, fanning its coals as he sprinkles herbs over a pan of pork belly soaked in wine and honey. A strong smell rises, pungent, sweet, oddly comforting. Above him hang dozens of clay amphorae, sealed with wax, labelled in ink faded with time. One is filled with olive oil, imported from Baetica in Hispania. Another holds vinegar, thick with the scent of fermented grapes. And beside them, nestled carefully like treasure, are jars of garum, the most treasured of Roman condiments, a fermented fish sauce made from the viscera of anchovies, left to rot beneath the sun for weeks before being strained and bottled. To the unaccustomed nose, it smells of death, but to the Roman palate, it smells of home. This kitchen, though modest, mirrors thousands across the empire. Some are humbler, with only a fire pit and a few pans, while others are grander. The hearths of villas, staffed by slaves trained in the art of fine cuisine. Yet all are bound by the same peculiar tastes of Roman appetite, an odd blend of earthy simplicity and lavish extravagance, of boiled grains and peacock tongues. A bowl of pulse, barley porridge eaten by the poor, bubbles slowly in a clay pot. It will be seasoned with whatever is at hand, perhaps onions, perhaps a touch of garum, maybe some herbs from the garden wall. For many Romans this is breakfast, lunch and dinner. Bland, filling, ordinary. But across the city, in a domus owned by a wealthy patrician, a different sort of meal is being planned. Slaves move quietly through mosaic-floored corridors, bringing ingredients into a much larger kitchen. A haunch of wild boar, a tray of dormice plump and motionless, a basket of dates, wine from Campania, honey from Corsica, eggs as large as a child's fist, the product of an ostrich brought from Africa. The cook here is older, experienced. He consults a scroll, a recipe from Apicius, the famed Roman gourmand whose name is now synonymous with decadence. He murmurs as he reads, flamingo tongue, boiled in vinegar, and dates, served chilled on a silver plate. He makes a note in the margin with a bit of charcoal. Perhaps add thyme. There's a strange beauty to it all. The care, the complexity, the absurdity. Roman cuisine wasn't just about nourishment. It was about identity, about status, about showcasing that while others may eat to survive, the Romans ate to conquer. Outside, the city begins to stir. You hear it faintly now, the rising chatter of vendors, the shouts from a distant market, the call of caged birds. But inside this kitchen, time seems to slow. A dormouse, plucked clean and stuffed with nuts and herbs, is placed delicately onto a tray. It will be roasted gently, then served with honey and poppy seeds. To us it may seem strange, perhaps even grotesque, but in Rome this was refinement. There are no clocks in the kitchen, but you sense that the morning has passed. The cook wipes his brow, stirring a pot of lentils made sweet with raisins and sour with vinegar. He hums a tune, something rustic, perhaps a song from his youth in the countryside of Latium. And all the while, garum waits, in every dish, in every meal, lurking in the shadows like salt, making everything just a little more Roman. So rest now. Imagine the cool stone walls of the kitchen, the hiss of wine hitting hot iron, the scent of coriander and pepper, the clink of terracotta lids, the slow simmer of strange, wonderful things. The Roman appetite was rarely one of hunger alone. It was a performance, a ritual, a statement to the world and to oneself of power, culture, and sophistication. A Roman did not simply eat, he dined. Let the sounds fall away around you now. Let the fire fade into the background as we slip from the simple kitchens of the poor to the grand triclinium, the formal dining room of a wealthy Roman citizen. The walls are painted with frescoes, birds, gods, grapes, mythical feasts. The couches, arranged in a U shape around a central table, are layered in embroidered cushions. It is late afternoon and the guests are arriving. They do not sit. They recline, left arm supporting the body, right hand free to pick at olives or figs. Slaves move like shadows, bearing trays and pouring wine diluted with water. There is music from a corner. A girl with a lyre plays softly, absent of melody, simply sound for ambience. And now, the food. A starter of oysters arrives, fresh from the Bay of Naples. They glisten under a drizzle of vinegar and pepper. Next, small birds, roasted and eaten whole, beak, bones and all. There are eggs dyed saffron yellow, their yolks scooped and mixed with pepper paste, before being returned to their shells. This is only the beginning, for a Roman banquet might last hours, winding through course after course, each stranger than the last. You can almost hear the murmured conversation, the polite laughter, the quiet scraping of bronze cutlery against ceramic plates. One guest offers a witty remark about the empire's latest campaign in Dacia. Another complains that his fish sauce is too mild. And there, in the centre of the table, sits the centrepiece, not always edible, sometimes simply theatrical. A roast pig, for example, stuffed with sausages and small birds, its belly sliced open mid-meal to reveal its surprise contents. Or perhaps a moulded dessert, shaped like a goose, but made entirely of almond paste and honey. One course gives way to another. The guests loosen their belts, literally, with a special bronze utensil called a cuspis, made for the purpose of relieving pressure during a long meal. More wine, more stories. Someone recites a few lines from Horace, and there's a knowing smile from across the room. And throughout it all, the flavours drift between the familiar and the foreign. Sweet and sour are mixed freely. Dishes are intentionally perfumed. Rose petals in sauces. Fennel seeds in desserts. Fish guts with honey. There is no distinction between savoury and sweet in Roman cooking, only the constant attempt to surprise the tongue. In another dish, boiled sow's udder, marinated in spices, is served on a silver plate. It's a delicacy. The cook is proud. He learned the recipe in Carthage under a master chef. He used real myrrh in the glaze, bought imported, expensive, excessive. And yet, there is pleasure here, a peculiar comfort. To the Romans, these strange concoctions were not strange at all. They were reminders of what made them different from the so-called barbarians. They were markers of empire, of trade routes, colonies, and conquered lands. Every bite told a story. The host smiles, satisfied. His guests are entertained. His chef has succeeded. A slave offers a napkin, soaked in scented water. The sun has dipped now, and lanterns glow against the painted walls. Outside, the city continues, but here, in this moment, time feels suspended. You too may rest. Let your imagination drift with the scent of cinnamon and lamb. Let the low murmur of distant voices fade into dream. Because in Rome, food was never just food, it was theatre. And tonight, the performance has just begun. Not all Roman tables groaned beneath the weight of peacock tongues and sugared roses. Beyond the marble walls and perfumed air of the banquet halls, down narrower lanes and shaded alleys, lay the world of the common folk. Their meals were not prepared with silver ladles or elaborate recipes, but with stone pots, shared hearths, and whatever could be found at market or grown in a courtyard garden. Let us step quietly into one of these insulae, the apartment blocks that rose high and crowded, home to shopkeepers, labourers, widows, scribes and slaves. A single room might hold an entire family. There is no private kitchen, only a shared hearth downstairs, blackened with years of soot. Here, food is humble, but still deeply Roman. A woman stoops over a small pot of lentils. She stirs slowly, humming under her breath. The children sleep in the corner, and the street noise is faint through the shuttered window. She adds leeks and garlic, a touch of vinegar, a spoon of olive oil, just enough to bring warmth to the bowl. There is no meat tonight. There is rarely meat. The staple for many Romans was grain, bread, porridge, or gruel. In the early empire, the state even distributed free grain to citizens, the famous annona. Ground into flour and baked in communal ovens, loaves were round, scored with wedges, and often tough. To soften them, people dipped their bread in oil or watered wine, or even soaked it in milk if they had a bit of luxury. In a nearby tavern, a man eats pulse, the porridge made from farro or barley. He sprinkles salt over it, maybe a few olives, a pickled onion. The owner sells a small cup of wine, so thin and sour it tastes more like vinegar. But it's something. It dulls the aches of the day. The man dips a crust into it, slowly, chewing with a rhythm that feels older than the city itself. There is no honey-glazed dormouse here, no flamingo tongues, but there is life, familiarity, a shared resilience. These meals, however meagre, fed the empire's heart, its soldiers, farmers and builders. They carried stones, raised walls, fought battles, and they ate lentils. Sometimes, if one were lucky, the market might offer something more. A bit of salted fish from the coast, a hunk of goat cheese wrapped in fig leaves, a bundle of dried dates, a chicken foot, or pig's ear for stew. The poor of Rome were creative, they had to be. Nothing was wasted, and everything was seasoned with care, no matter how humble. Children chewed on roasted chickpeas sold hot from little carts. Vendors sliced melon or hawked boiled beans wrapped in parchment. In the summer heat, water sellers moved through the streets with cups of cold spring water, flavoured with mint or a drop of vinegar. A sweet sour drink called posca, once the refreshment of soldiers and slaves alike. Even the leftovers of the elite were sometimes repurposed. A crust discarded by a senator's slave might become a beggar's breakfast. A bruised apple, too soft for a feast, would still be sliced and shared between three, and so the empire moved on porridge and onions, beans and bread, fish and vinegar. It is easy to forget the thousands of quiet lives that sustained Rome, but if you close your eyes now and listen carefully, you might hear them. The scrape of a spoon on clay, the laughter of a child over half a fig, the low crackle of a shared fire. Sleep now. Let the imagined smell of bread cooling on stone and the rhythm of an ordinary day lull you. For even in simplicity there was flavour, there was warmth, there was Rome. No discussion of Roman food, strange or not, would be complete without mentioning garum. This sauce revered, reviled, and relentlessly poured over everything from meats to melons was the lifeblood of Roman flavour. Its scent was unmistakable, sharp, briny, fermented. It was created from the crushed innards of fish mixed with salt, then left to ferment under the sun for days, sometimes weeks. It sounds harsh to our modern ears, almost unpalatable, but to Roman palates, garum was culinary gold. Imagine it now. A merchant returns from the coast, his amphora sealed tightly, carrying the prized sauce inland. In villas and taverns it is uncorked, drizzled over lentils, swirled into honey, spread atop roasted meats. It deepens flavour, adds complexity, and yes, to some, its pungency even evokes appetite. Aulus, a wealthy landowner reclining at his midday feast, dips a piece of roasted fig into a bowl where garum has been whisked with honey and vinegar. Sweet, sour, salty, rich. His guests murmur approval. Even the children at the foot of the table, eyes wide at their first taste, are silent, perhaps in confusion, perhaps in delight. But garum was not only for the wealthy. There were many grades. The finest garum sociorum, often exported across the empire, fetched enormous prices and was reserved for the elite. But there were also humble variants, alec made from the dregs of the fermentation process, which flavoured the food of Rome's poor. Everyone, from senators to slaves, knew that scent. In some homes, clay pots sat in courtyards, filled with chopped fish and salt, set out under the sun. Housewives stirred the mix, covering it with cloth, waiting for the golden liquid to separate and rise. It was a small economy of flavour, a household treasure. And there were more culinary eccentricities. Apicius, the famed Roman gourmand whose name became synonymous with luxury, left behind recipes that stun modern readers. Dormice stuffed with minced pork and pine nuts, covered in honey and poppy seeds, jellyfish drizzled with oil and vinegar, flamingo breasts in sweet wine sauce. He recommended boiling ostrich meat with dates and cumin. He praised sow's udder, stuffed with herbs and pine kernels. To eat in his world was not merely to nourish the body, but to astonish the senses, and possibly the guests. This extravagance was not merely appetite, it was status. To consume the rarest animals, the strangest combinations. To serve pheasant tongues or eels stewed in peaches was a signal. I can afford what others cannot. I dine beyond boundaries. And still, it was not only taste but ritual. Certain foods were eaten during religious ceremonies. Eggs and lentils for funerals, honey cakes for weddings, salted flour cakes, mola salsa, prepared by the Vestal virgins, were sacred offerings to the gods. Eating in Rome was rarely just eating. It was memory, status, piety, performance, and at times a sheer indulgence. Yet even in their most curious recipes, the Romans sought balance. The idea of gustus, the appetizer, came into form. Flavours were meant to be harmonised, sweet with sharp, sour with fat, herbs with wine. They understood pairing, layering, texture. The banquets may have been strange, but they were never careless. And now you lie here, lulled by stories of sauces and roasted figs, the imagined scent of spice drifting through your thoughts. Let the fire crackle gently as you sink into dreams. You are full, not with food, but with time itself, memories you've borrowed from another world. As dusk settled over the tiled rooftops of ancient Rome, and the streets grew quiet, save for the clatter of distant sandals or the cry of a street vendor heading home, Roman thoughts turned once more to food, not for sustenance, but for pleasure. And pleasure, for the Romans, often came wrapped in honey. Sugar, as we know it, was still centuries away, but honey flowed generously through Roman kitchens. It sweetened bread, flavoured wine, preserved fruit, and was even used in cosmetics and medicine. Bees were cherished creatures. Their hives dotted gardens and country estates, and their golden produce was collected with reverence. Imagine now a warm Roman evening. A clay tray is set upon a simple table, not in the home of a senator this time, but that of a retired centurion living modestly. There are honey-glazed nuts, perhaps almonds or walnuts, roasted until they crackle and shine. There is stewed pear, dusted with cinnamon and soaked in spiced wine. A wedge of sharp cheese sits beside it, for the Romans believed in the harmony of opposites, sweet with salty, cold with warm. Desserts were not necessarily served at the end of meals, as we understand them today. Instead, they might appear as interludes in a long dinner, delicate bites between courses to refresh the tongue or offer delight. Dried figs stuffed with sesame, poppy seed pastries, apple slices fried in olive oil and drizzled with date syrup, chestnuts roasted until their skins burst, split open and steaming in the hands of those who passed them around. For children, honey cakes were a special delight, small, round, soft-scented. For the elderly, stewed dates or crushed nuts mixed with flour and wine offered comfort to weary teeth. But sweets were not just indulgence. They were sometimes offered to household gods, left on tiny altars, tucked in kitchen corners, where figurines of Lares and Penates watched over daily life. A bit of honey, a sprinkle of flour, and a whispered word. Thanks for the harvest, for health, for one more peaceful night. As Roman households prepared for bed, one could find rituals that involved food too. A sip of warm milk mixed with honey, a small crust of bread soaked in wine. These simple acts were believed to calm the body and encourage restful sleep. And as night deepened, the last embers of the hearth glowed low. A mother wrapped a wool blanket around her child, who had sticky fingers and the faint scent of honey on their breath. Outside, the world quieted, the forum darkened, the Tiber whispered, and Rome herself seemed to sigh. There was a curious Roman practice, quiet and almost tender in its strangeness, that of dining with the dead. On certain days of the year, families would gather at tombs and mausoleums, bringing baskets of food and pitchers of wine, laying them beside graves and sharing a meal in the presence of their ancestors. These were not mournful banquets, but acts of continuity. You were never truly gone if you were still fed. Bread, olives, boiled eggs, sometimes a roast bird, all laid out beneath stone inscriptions. The food was symbolic, a bridge between the living and the departed. Libations were poured into hollow tubes that descended into the earth, allowing wine or honey to touch the soil near the bones below. Even the simplest meal, eaten in the soft shade of cypress trees and accompanied by whispered remembrance, became sacred. And then there were the future-oriented feasts, meals given not for memory, but for legacy. In Rome, to eat extravagantly was to declare permanence. Lavish banquets were held by those hoping to rise in the ranks of power. A candidate for public office might feed an entire neighbourhood, distributing bread, cured meats, fruit, and warm wine to gain favour. During festivals, temporary kitchens would spring up in the streets, where hired cooks roasted whole boars or prepared garum-glazed fish in enormous bronze pans. These meals weren't just offerings, they were performances. To dine well was to show influence, to feed others well was to bind them to your name. At weddings, the food was not just for guests. Special cakes were baked for the bride to carry, sweet, dense, often made with cheese and honey, and she would share them in small bites with her new household as a sign of unity. At births, neighbours were invited to break bread and pass around dishes of eggs and nuts, symbols of fertility and good luck. Every moment in Roman life, it seemed, had a meal tied to it. To eat was to commemorate, to aspire, to belong. You too may feel now that gentle connection, the way the past lingers in quiet customs. You've eaten meals in silence, you've toasted to absent friends, you've lit candles at dinners that felt like rituals. Perhaps tonight's story is not as far from your own life as it first seemed. Imagine now the difference between two meals, one held beneath soaring marble ceilings, the other beside a clay hearth in a shadowed back alley. At the emperor's table, food arrived as spectacle. Silver platters, so polished they reflected torchlight like water, held dishes designed to astonish. There might be flamingo tongues, served cold and pickled in brine, or dormice, tiny creatures stuffed with pork, pine nuts and pepper, then roasted until golden and curled in their own warmth. Fish were served swimming in sauces of wine, honey and fermented anchovy paste. A rich flavour, salty and strange to modern taste, but beloved by Romans of every rank. The emperor might not eat every dish. Some were for show, to impress foreign guests, or affirm his status as ruler of the known world. To be served a peacock, its feathers reattached to its cooked body for grandeur, was to witness Rome's might in culinary form. But not far away, in a cramped and smoky insulae, a Roman apartment block, another meal was unfolding. A woman tended to a small fire. She stirred a pot of pulse, the grainy porridge that fed most of Rome. She added wild herbs gathered from the cracks between stones near the aqueduct, and a bit of olive oil, perhaps gifted or saved. A crust of stale bread was softened in warm water and set beside it. If she was lucky, a single fig remained, wrinkled and sweet. Her child, wrapped in faded linen, sat near her, soot on their cheeks, waiting for the first taste. No silver, no spectacle, just nourishment, just survival. Yet, in that humble meal, there was a thread tying her to the emperor. Grain from the same farms, oil from the same groves, warmth from the same sun that lit the palaces. Rome, for all its divisions, was a city of eaters. Even those enslaved in grand households, who prepared elaborate dishes but rarely tasted them, would sneak scraps, not always out of hunger, but sometimes out of memory. A flavour that reminded them of home. A smell that made the work feel less like servitude, if only for a moment. In the darkening quiet of your own room, this thought lingers like steam. That food, humble or grand, is memory made edible. It's comfort, identity, connection. And as you breathe slowly now, you might feel some part of ancient Rome, not in its grandeur, but in its simplicity. A shared meal, a quiet evening, a full belly, and the slow drift into sleep. In your own space now, you lie still, perhaps imagining that fig stuffed pastry or the scent of roasted chestnut. Your thoughts drift slowly, like olive oil across warm bread. There is no hurry here. The feast is over, but the comfort remains. Rest now and let ancient sweetness lull you toward dreams. When you wake, Rome will still be there, not in its walls or ruins, but in the quiet memory of a taste, a moment, a flame. Good night.